Over the past year or two around the world, statues have been toppled and street names changed as decolonization has once again returned to the agenda. But for the past half century or so, the water's been muddied about colonialism by those who peddle the notion that we're somehow living in a post-colonial world. This post-colonial theory gained currency in American and British universities in the 1970s and 1980s. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it was most popular among non-colonised intellectuals from the labour aristocracy of the imperialist cores. But to accept this theory, we need to accept that those who bear the brunt of colonialism truly are post-colonial, or after colonialism, that decolonisation has already been successfully completed. Acceptance of post-colonialism is thus the denial of the new form of colonialism today, of Neo-Colonialism. Denial of the continuing colonial domination of the oppressed nations of the world. And the argument that this video is going to put forward is that this is a load of shite. That colonialism is alive and well today under a new guise. Its form has certainly changed, but its essence remains the same. Now of course, old-style colonialism does still exist. The occupied 6 counties in Ireland remains a British colony. Palestine is colonised by Israel. French Guiana is a French colony. Guam is a US colony, and so on and so forth. But today we're going to focus primarily on the semi-colonies, or what some would call neo-colonies, which are nominally politically independent, but in reality completely dominated through 1,000 different ways by the imperialist powers. Crucially, as we'll see, these semi-colonies retain the colonial economic base of bureaucratic comprador capitalism that maintains their colonial subjugation indefinitely, even where full political independence has been achieved on paper. While this applies universally across the colonies and semi-colonies of the Third World, particularly in Africa, Asia and Latin America, this video will primarily use the semi-colonised 26-county Free State known internationally as the Republic of Ireland to demonstrate the mechanisms through which colonial domination persists today. Now, first things first, it might be necessary to clarify the terminology being used to make sure we're all on the same page here, specifically regarding the terms colonialism, semi-colonialism and neo-colonialism. Under old-style colonialism, colonies are openly under the control of one particular colonial power, facilitating super-exploitation, the loot and plunder of resources, control of the country's markets, and so on. Under new-style colonialism, or neo-colonialism, semi-colonies are covertly under the control of one or more colonial powers, achieving super-exploitation, loot and plunder of resources, and control of markets through various different hidden means. James Connolly insightfully anticipated this phenomenon in 1897 when he criticised the moderates' narrow nationalist conception of independence for Ireland, stating that, "If you remove the English army tomorrow and hoist the green flag over Dublin Castle, unless you set about the organisation of the Socialist Republic, your efforts would be in vain." England would still rule you. She would rule you through her capitalists, through her landlords, through her financiers, through the whole array of commercial and individualist institutions she has planted in this country and watered with the tears of our mothers and the blood of our martyrs. England would still rule you to your ruin, even while your lips offered hypocritical homage at the shrine of that freedom whose cause you had betrayed. Here, Connolly perfectly predicted the transition from old-style colonialism to new-style colonialism, from the colony to the semi-colony, from having a British flag flying over Dublin Castle and being openly ruled by explicitly British state forces like their army, to having an Irish flag flying over Dublin Castle and being covertly ruled through England's capitalists, landlords, financiers, and whole array of commercial and individualist institutions, which are, in any case, all inextricably bound up with the English ruling class's own state apparatus. And importantly, Connolly states that England would still decisively rule us, just in a different, hidden form. In other words, colonialism's structures of economic exploitation were already firmly in place and would no longer require direct political rule in order to maintain, so nominal political independence may be granted. The Irish could wave the flag and pretend to have achieved freedom, meanwhile the very same colonial economic exploitation would continue behind the curtains. The very same colonial economic exploitation which generates political and cultural domination. And unfortunately, Connolly's predictions have been proven correct today, as the history of 100 years of the counter-revolutionary 26-county Irish Free State bears testament to. Despite grandiose narratives about the so-called War of Independence, the Free State, known internationally as the Republic of Ireland, has never been an independent territory. Where the occupied 6 counties known as Northern Ireland remains an old-style colony openly controlled by Britain, the 26 counties today is a new-style semi-colony that's covertly controlled by Britain and increasingly by other North American and European imperialist powers. As anticipated by Connolly, the Free State government still pays ground rent to its feudal landlord, the British state, for the government buildings in Dublin, even for Dublin Castle itself. Yes, you heard correctly, the ground rents of feudalism still exist in Ireland today, over 250,000 of them in fact, primarily benefiting British absentee landlords. The British state itself also still directly owns major trade ports like Rosslare Harbour in the southeast, a hugely important strategic asset under an 1895 British statute. And this direct ownership of Ireland, its land, its assets and resources, isn't even getting into the question of British finance capital exports in the country. It's not getting into the British Royal Air Force's domination of Irish airspace. It's not getting into British domination of the Irish Sea and its resources. It's certainly not getting into the head of the Irish Free State Police Force's connections to MI5 and the British state apparatus. It's not getting into the conversation of cultural imperialism. It's not getting into the colonial titles of Dublin's streets like Talbot Street, Westmoreland Street, etc. But even from this narrow snapshot, it's clear that Ireland remains thoroughly dominated by British imperialism. That the colonial exploitation and domination of this country remains, even in the 26 counties where nominal political independence has, we're told, already been achieved. That decolonisation has never actually truly happened. These aren't just mere remnants of a colonial past that's been superseded as we've transitioned into post-colonialism, but instead symptoms of the neo-colonial present. You see, in the semi-colonies, the economic base of colonialism remains intact, and as we know, the economic base in the final instance is the ultimate determining element in history which generates its corresponding societal superstructure that in turn reinforces that base. Even the nominal political independence afforded by the Free State project is ultimately shaped by this persisting colonial economic base as bureaucratic compradors who are in the pockets of imperialism have, since the counter-revolution's inception, governed the state. And this transition from old-style colonial domination to neo-colonial domination isn't the exception but the rule. I've spoken here primarily about Ireland, but these persisting structures of colonialism that continue to economically subjugate are present in virtually all of the former old-style colonies that have achieved nominal political independence. We can see this crystal clearly in the French colonial taxes still imposed upon 14 African countries that were its former old-style colonies. This keeps these countries artificially poor by funneling wealth from the third world and into the first world, maintaining their colonial subjugation indefinitely despite their nominal political independence. And this is par for the course with neo-colonialism, which has become the preferred form of colonial domination by imperialist powers since the latter half of the 20th century, as it presents the illusion of independence and masks the true continued economic, political and cultural subjugation of these countries, which is an extremely effective way of preventing the kinds of armed uprisings that old-style colonialism often provoked. Now, the terms neo-colonialism and semi-colonialism have been more or less used interchangeably so far, but it's worth taking a moment to tease out the subtle differences between the two. In 1916's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, Lenin wrote of the semi-colonies that, as to the semi-colonial states, they provide an example of the transitional forms which are to be found in all spheres of nature and society. Finance capital is such a decisive, you might say, force in all economic and international relations that it is capable of subjecting, and actually does subject, to itself even states enjoying the fullest political independence. So Lenin here outlines how finance capital in and of itself is able to decisively subjugate nations without the need for open political domination. However, Lenin wrote about semi-colonialism as a transitional form, either in the direction of full old-style colonialism or, less likely, full decolonisation. But over the course of the 20th century, it became clear that semi-colonies could be frozen in this transitional form indefinitely, and that indeed this state was the most efficient form of colonialism. The recognition of this new form that imperialism was moving towards, based on the indefinite exploitation of semi-colonies rather than old-style colonies, led theorists like Kwame Nkrumah to famously label this stage as neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Now, there are pros and cons to both terms, semi-colonialism and neo-colonialism. With semi-colonialism, the semi may indicate that it's only half colonialism and not the full experience. This causes problems when we understand that the determining economic base of colonialism is present within semi-colonialism. Or, in other words, semi-colonialism is actually full colonialism under a different guise. Conversely, the problem with the term neo-colonialism is that neo may suggest that this form of colonialism is new, which it's not exactly. Semi-colonies have been around almost as long as old-style colonies. The only aspect that's new about this form of colonialism is that it's now the preferred form of colonialism and division of the world enjoyed by the imperialist powers. Personally, only speaking for myself, I usually use the term semi-colonies to refer to the countries and the term neo-colonialism to refer to the period of time wherein semi-colonies have become the preferred form of territorial division and redivision of the world by the imperialist powers that came into being in the latter half of the 20th century. That being said, revolutionary theorists like Comrade Ajit from CPI Maoist uses the terms neo-colony and semi-colony interchangeably to refer to the oppressed countries, as did Kwame Nkrumah, so you'll find a diversity of opinion on this matter. Let me know in the comments below which term you think encapsulates this phenomenon best. In any case, however you prefer to label it, the critical point is that in such cases the fundamental essence of colonial subjugation remains, and this opens up the pathway for potential national liberation struggles. Now, it was mentioned earlier that semi-colonies have the same economic base of old-style colonialism, at least the old-style colonies of the 19th and 20th century. The name of this base is bureaucratic capitalism, or bureaucratic comprador capitalism. Bureaucratic comprador capitalism is a capitalism born to two sick parents, imperialism and a backward native economic base, typically semi-feudalism. Bureaucratic comprador capitalism arose in the world through imperialist investment into backward economic systems, leading to the development of productive forces tied completely to both imperialism and native reactionary relations of production. In the age of capitalist imperialism, the imperialist powers themselves, served by native comprador exploiters, generate capitalism in the economically backward countries in order to serve their own imperialist interests. That is, to facilitate super exploitation and siphon wealth from the third world into the first world and create relations of dependency. Now, as you'll recall from the recent Socialism 101 video on capitalist imperialism, the cornerstone of imperialism is finance capital, the merged form of monopolised banking capital and monopolised industrial capital. This finance capital is then exported around the world in order to return super profits, primarily through what's now known as foreign direct investment. However, not all countries have gone through this process of developing true industrial capitalism and into imperialist capitalism. Their own native merging of banking capital and industrial capital didn't happen, as these countries in many cases still retained primarily feudal relations of production. Instead, finance capital was foisted upon these countries from abroad by foreign imperialists and their capital exports, without having a fully fleshed out native industrial capitalist base. Consequently, in the oppressed nations, in the nations under bureaucratic comprador capitalism, the finance capital that dominates these countries is not their own native finance capital, but primarily the finance capital of foreign imperialists. British finance capital, French finance capital, American finance capital, and so on. This holds true for both the old-style colonies and the semi-colonies alike. This importation of finance capital into the oppressed nations is facilitated by native compradors, traitors to the oppressed nation who, while not being imperialists themselves, are committed servants of imperialism. Now, at a certain stage of advanced development and monopolization by the compradors, again based on foreign finance capital, the non-state comprador monopolists merge with the native ruling classes from the backward economic base, often the feudal ruling class of the landlords, into an oppressed nation state. This creates a form of state monopoly capitalism that's tied to and dependent upon foreign imperialism by the comprador bourgeoisie's reliance upon foreign finance capital. This makes this particular form of state semi-colonial and often semi-feudal. The bureaucratic comprador capitalist state is thus a joint dictatorship of two sections of the bourgeoisie, the bureaucratic bourgeoisie and the comprador bourgeoisie, who in practice often end up becoming the very same people. So, to reiterate, bureaucratic comprador capitalism can thus be summarised as follows. 1. Bureaucratic capitalism is capitalism that imperialism develops in the backward countries, which is comprised of the capital of large landowners, the big bankers, and the magnates of the big bourgeoisie. 2. It exploits the proletariat, the peasantry, and the petty bourgeoisie, and constrains the middle bourgeoisie. 3. It is passing through a process in which bureaucratic capitalism is combined with the power of the state and becomes state monopoly capitalism, comprador and feudal, from which can be derived that in the first moment it unfolds as a non-state big monopoly capitalism, and in a second moment, when it is combined with the power of the state, it unfolds as state monopoly capitalism. 4. It ripens the conditions for the democratic revolution as it reaches the apex of its development. And 5. Confiscating bureaucratic capital is key to reaching the pinnacle of the democratic revolution, and it is decisive to pass over to the socialist revolution. Now, this economic base of bureaucratic comprador capitalism of course generates its own particular superstructure which permeates all aspects of society in the colonies and the semi-colonies. Under the influence of imperialism, those of the oppressed nation come to speak the language of the imperialists, to follow their news, to watch their films, to support their sports teams, to pray to their gods. All aspects of society come to reflect the colonial base in one way or another, sometimes subtly and sometimes not so subtly. In the 26 counties of Ireland, for example, despite nominal political independence, less than 4% of the territory's inhabitants use the Irish language on a daily basis, instead speaking English. But modern Irish accents provide an even more interesting reflection of the deepening of semi-colonialism. One of the distinguishing features of semi-colonialism as against old-style colonialism is that the semi-colony is shared out among more than one imperialist power. Today, the 26 counties constitutes a semi-colony of not just Britain, but in fact British, European and North American imperialism. As the 26 counties moved to becoming dominated more and more by US imperialist capital exports towards the end of the 20th century, a new accent began to emerge across Ireland. Suddenly, Irish young people had begun to sound more like they were from California than from Ballymun. You see, the society's culture, a key aspect of the superstructure, has transformed in tandem with the shifting relations of the economic base as US influence has grown and British influence wanes. So now we no longer only see Irish people who speak English with English accents, but more and more Irish people who speak English with American accents. And this is a dialectical reflection of the international tug-of-war between the imperialist powers of Britain and the US for economic, political and cultural domination of this country. Of course, this domination is often quite difficult for the oppressed nation to see because of the hidden nature of semi-colonialism, and this creates national false consciousness. Much like the social false consciousness of the barely scraping by proletarian who believes themselves to be middle class, members of the semi-colonies too often struggle to see their own continued national oppression, mistaking on-paper political independence for true national liberation. As Comrade Ajit writes, the neo-colonial mind is blind to the imperialist system in which the country is enmeshed. With their vision blocked from seeing the real world by the false consciousness of independence and its articulation as narrow nationalism, the neo-colonial intellectual technocrat proposes and pursues policies that heighten imperialism's grip ever more, all the while believing that they will strengthen the country. Which is why so many Irish people today unfortunately believe that integrating more deeply into the European Union is the solution to all of our political ills, rather than pursuing the path of national liberation, self-sufficiency and genuine economic, political and cultural independence with a 32-county Socialist Republic of Ireland. So, as we can see, the concept of post-colonialism is a red herring that serves to perpetuate imperialist colonial domination. The colonies aren't post-anything. Old-style colonialism has simply changed form into neo-colonialism in order to avoid provoking the violent uprisings of the national liberation struggles seen throughout the 20th century. Neo-colonialism has also become dominant in order to facilitate the redivision of the world among the big capitalist imperialist powers. As countries like the United States have risen in power and influence globally, neo-colonialism has proven itself a much more flexible, much less violent, read much more economically efficient, system in this regard, as it presents the possibility for multiple imperialist powers to super-exploit and semi-colonize each of the oppressed nations simultaneously. Under neo-colonialism, the defining colonial economic base of bureaucratic comprador capitalism remains intact indefinitely and reproduces the colonial superstructure, reflecting the balance of power among the imperialist nations. The only way to overcome this, to make the persisting colonial reality a thing of the past, is by moving beyond the position of dependency and pursuing a path of genuine national liberation and self-sufficiency under a socialist system. Now, there are a few texts that I recommend diving into in order to deepen your understanding of neo-colonialism and the bureaucratic comprador capitalist economic base of the semi-colonies. First, of course, is Lenin's Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, particularly chapter 6, which discusses colonialism and semi-colonialism. Second, Kwame Nkrumah's Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, provides the first comprehensive analysis of this period and its corresponding mechanisms of super-exploitation. This is absolutely essential reading for all those who oppose colonialism and imperialism. Next, while Mao also wrote about bureaucrat capitalism in his works, the PCP's line of the Democratic Revolution in their 1988 General Political Line thoroughly fleshes out a comprehensive analysis of bureaucratic comprador capitalism, which is a must-read for anyone interested in understanding the underpinning economic base of oppressed nation-states. For more on bureaucratic comprador capitalism today, make sure to have a read of the Red Flag's Notes on Bureaucratic Comprador Capitalism Article 1, which also quite thoroughly explains the phenomenon, but more importantly demonstrates it using modern examples, even analysing certain semi-colonies in Europe, interestingly. Also worth reading is its attached document Appendix to Notes on Bureaucratic Comprador Capitalism Article 1, which explains precisely how to distinguish between imperialist nations and oppressed nations. Also make sure to have a read of Comrade Ajit's Of Concepts and Methods on Postisms and other essays, particularly the working of the neo-colonial mind, for more on the superstructural aspects of neo-colonialism, as well as for a more thorough debunking of post-colonial theory. Lastly, to those interested, for more on the feudal system of ground rent in Ireland referenced earlier, have a read of Seamus Costello's speech Who Owns the Ground Rent in Ireland in revolutionary works published by Foreign Language Press. All are linked in the description box below. Right, thanks very much for watching this video, hopefully you found it useful in one way or another. Thanks especially to the supporters on Patreon who've made this possible. Thank you Southern Comrade, Ian McShay, Hugh Gopnik, Ian Snyder, Jacob Jaff, Borku Gorilla, Ryan Hodgson, Soup, Madeline, Sonic232, Sagan, Michaela Schmid, Christian Nepales, Alfonso Dingo Torres, Mekalova, Rock Artist, Todd Sprang, Nike the Sage, Zakasi, Anglo-Irish Bolshevik, Amy Schmidt, Eli Leslie, Thomas Ross and Wood, Bobby Block, Jason Schmidt, Del Siebold, Train H13, Mitch Schiller, Saoirse Velan, Roja, MLM in Practice, Brian Roos, Eric Lindahl, ZK Goody, Kyle Rapp, Robert Jarzak, Doc Toma, Oyub Farah, Becky, Pastor Jubert, Mr. Miyamoto, Coyle King, Reverend Lonnam Hollywood, Wonderbad, JT Chapman, Joseph Shepard, Jack Schneidman, Comrade Amara, Wealth for the 99%, Spoop, and Trailer Park Communists. Cheers everyone, agus slán go fóill.